At 6 in the morning, for the better part of 50 years, 40,000 people walked through the same set of gates on the edge of London. Buses queued for half a mile. Bicycles stacked 10 deep against the railings. A tide of donkey jackets and flat caps moving through fog rolling off the Thames estuary. Today, you can stand at those same gates and hear almost nothing. A handful of cars in a car park built for thousands. A factory that once built one in every 3 cars driven in Britain now employs fewer people than a single Tesco superstore. This is the story of how that happened. And it isn't a story about one bad decision. It's a story about a factory that won almost every fight it picked and still lost the war. In 1924, Ford bought 475 acres of marshland on the edge of Dagenham, Essex, for £167,700. The ground was so soft that builders drove 22,000 concrete piles through the clay just to stop the site from sinking into the estuary. What went up on top of those piles wasn't just a factory. It was a small industrial nation. Ford Dagenham had its own jetty on the Thames for importing raw steel and coal by ship, its own coal-fired power station, its own steel foundry. It made the metal, stamped the panels, built the engines, and assembled the cars, all inside one perimeter fence. Nothing outside those gates was needed to build a car. The first vehicle rolled off the line in October 1931. A Ford AA light truck. The timing was brutal. Britain was deep in the Depression, and for the first few years, Dagenham limped along, outsold by homegrown rivals like Morris. Then came the Ford 8 in 1932. Cheap, simple, reliable, and the plant found its footing. By 1937, it was turning out 37,000 vehicles a year. Dagenham had become the largest car factory in Europe, and it hadn't even reached its peak. The war interrupted everything, and then, strangely, accelerated it. Dagenham spent the 1940s building military trucks and Bren gun carriers. When peace came, the country needed cars faster than it could build them. And Dagenham was already the biggest factory in the country, built to do exactly that. Between 1946 and 1959, the plant roughly quadrupled its floor space and its workforce to match. By 1953, employment peaked at around 40,000 people. Output climbed with it. Over 1 million cars a year by 1950, 1.4 million by 1955. The jobs pulled in workers from across Britain and Ireland in such numbers that the streets around the plant became known locally as Mini Cork. Entire families worked the same lines for 3 generations. Pay was solid for the area. Not spectacular, but dependable. And dependable was the point. A shift at Ford meant a mortgage, a car of your own, a future you could actually plan around. By the mid-1950s, 1 in 3 cars on British roads had come out of that one factory on the marsh. Dagenham wasn't just a workplace anymore. It was the thing the entire borough was built around. Here is where this story splits from the version you'd expect. Dagenham didn't get sold out by a distant trade deal or a single catastrophic decision from head office. What happened at Dagenham happened from the inside, one victory at a time. By the late 1960s, the plant had one of the most militant workforces in Britain. Shop stewards, not managers, often ran the factory floor day to day. And in June 1968, that culture produced the moment Dagenham is still best remembered for. 187 women sewing machinists, the workers who stitched the seat covers, walked out after Ford regraded their skilled work as unskilled labor, cutting their pay below their male colleagues. Within days, the factory had no seats to put in cars, and 9,000 men were laid off with nothing left to assemble. the company lost the equivalent of well over £100 million in today's money in export orders. The women won. Barbara Castle, the Secretary of State, personally intervened, and the strike helped force the Equal Pay Act of 1970 through Parliament, one of the most important pieces of workplace legislation in British history. It's a genuine victory. It's also, quietly, the start of the pattern. Through the 1970s, unofficial walkouts at Dagenham became routine. Overpay, overgrading, overconditions. In February 1971 alone, 44,000 Ford workers struck nationally, 10,000 of them at Dagenham. Each dispute, taken on its own, had a real and often justified grievance behind it. Taken together, they gave Ford's head office in Detroit and Cologne a simple, repeated lesson. Investment sent to Dagenham was investment at risk. So investment stopped going to Dagenham. It went to newer plants, in continental Europe, in Spain, in Belgium, where the same money bought fewer headaches. Dagenham didn't lose its work through one dramatic betrayal. It lost it in small increments, plant by plant, model by model, every time Ford needed to decide where the next production line would go. By the 1990s, Dagenham was building the Fiesta, a car, not a flagship. In 2002, vehicle assembly stopped there completely. In October 2012, Ford announced the stamping plant itself would close, taking another 1,000 jobs with it. The presses that had shaped Dagenham steel since 1931 fell silent in 2013. The numbers tell the story cleanly enough. From 40,000 jobs at its peak to roughly 3,000 after the 2002 assembly closure, to around 2,000 today. Almost all of them building diesel engines rather than cars. But the numbers don't capture what happened to the borough around the factory. Unemployment in Barking and Dagenham rose sharply through the 2000s as the closures compounded. A community that had organized itself for 70 years around shift patterns and factory wages had to find a new shape without much warning of what that shape should be. The stamping plant, the building where sheet steel had been pressed into car doors and bonnets for 80 years, was demolished between 2016 and 2020. What's rising on that ground now isn't cars. It's houses. Beam Park, a development of more than 3,000 new homes, is being built directly on top of where the presses used to run. Construction workers now outnumber factory workers on the site that once employed more people than most towns. Talk to anyone who lived across from those gates for long enough, and you'll hear the same detail, almost word for word. It used to be nans, granddads, mums, and dads, 3 generations turning up for the same shift. Now it's young families moving into new-build flats who have never once heard the whistle that used to mark the change of shift, because there hasn't been one to hear in over a decade. Here's the part that complicates any tidy ending. Ford Dagenham did not die. Walk past the original 1931 engine plant today, and it is still working, producing close to 1 million diesel engines a year, shipped out to Ford factories worldwide. In a strange way, the oldest building on the site outlasted almost everything built around it. But an engine plant employing 2,000 people is not the same institution as an assembly complex employing 40,000. It's a fragment, kept alive because it's still useful, sitting inside the footprint of something that used to be a small industrial nation in its own right. Go back to those gates one more time. Picture the fog, the bicycles stacked 10 deep, the tide of donkey jackets moving through at 6 in the morning. Every one of those people believed, with good reason, that the work would still be there for their children. Nobody signed a single order that ended Dagenham. No memo closed it in one stroke. It went the way most great industrial stories actually go. Not with a single dramatic decision, but with 10,000 smaller, defensible ones. each one making sense on its own, each one quietly moving the next order, the next model, the next investment, somewhere else. The factory didn't lose the war by making one bad call. It won nearly every battle it fought, and each victory left it a little more expensive, a little more replaceable, until there was nowhere left to send the work but away. The gates are still standing. Most mornings now, almost nobody walks through them.